Okay, just one more minute. Make sure everybody's contributed. 1 minute. Okay, let us move on. I hope you had opportunity to answer that difficult question in whatever the context is that you work and serve. So we're going to move into our third session. So just a quick reminder, and thank you for your welcome. We really are enjoying doing this. But just a reminder that in Regents, we have some modules that do Bible. We do Torah, we do Gospels, we do Old Testament prophets, we do Hebrews Revelation, we do Paul's letters, we do all that. But we also do quite a number of modules on leadership ministry, and on pastoral issues as well. So this is just a little glimpse into some of the stuff we do on leadership. So it's not a biblical module. We'll throw a little Bible in, you'll see as we go. But just to assure you, the Bible lies underneath everything, but because everything doesn't have a Bible verse doesn't mean it's not godly. So just saying that's where we'll be going tonight. And so the collaborative leader. So a reminder that we're in week 3 of a 5-week session, which is on leadership and followership. Now, we've deliberately said healthy leadership and followership because there's a foundation in there that it's equally important to be a good follower as it is to be a good leader. And one of the things that frustrates me is when people think it's better to be a leader. If you know your Bible, Romans 12, 7 gifts that are basic to who we are, and leadership is one of those 7. But so is stimulating the faith of others, so is being generous, so is showing mercy, and so is teaching. They're all in there. And so never ever assume that leadership is better than followership, or because someone is a leader means they're better. If God calls you to leadership, please don't think you're better than others. And so it's so important. So that's why this is not just leadership, it's healthy leadership and followership. And this session on the collaborative leader. And so the collaborative, co-labor. So labor is to work. And so this is not a session on having friends and being mates. It's about working together. So there's leadership, there's followership, there's collaboration. So let's begin to think, what makes a healthy team? Sorry, that's jumped a little bit. There we go. What makes a healthy team? Is it one person swallowing another? That's not good. I don't know what the future of that little, oh my goodness. Or is it a bit of healthy intimidation? A bit of domineering? Is that leadership? Ooh. Or is it racing at somebody like a couple of rhinos, demolishing all that's in front of you? No. And sadly, there have been those sort of models of leadership, and sometimes they're referred to as the alpha male type leadership, that dominance, that control. That is not collaborative leadership. But what about then, is it just about having fun? Let's just have some fun together. We're a bunch of people having fun. No. That's not laboring together either. I hope you've got times. I hope you've got people you can be goofy with. I hope you've got people you can be daft with. That's important in life. Last weekend, my wife and I were some of our best friends for the weekend, and we could just be stupid with them. That's important, but this is not what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about working together, being co-laborers to accomplish a goal. It's really important. And there's another picture. Now, that's a bit more like it. That is a bit more like it. Those guys, or lady guys, those guys driving those planes, they know what they're doing. There's coordination in there. There's direction, there's purpose. Those are people who trust each other and they know what they're doing. But you know what probably is one of my favorites? I love this one. I love rowing. Oh, I love rowing. And so the little one right at the top, at the back, that's bow. You call that position, that last rower, and they take all the bumps, they take the weather, they take the storm, they take the splashes. That's bow. The one right at the front, on the right-hand side that's rowing, she's stroke. And stroke is the person that sets the pace. If you know rowing, the person at the front, everybody's got to row the same way they do. The timing and the pace of it is them. And then you've got the people in the middle that have got to make sure that they keep in step with one another. Oh, this is a great model of labouring together, of teamwork. And the cocks, the little one at the front, this is a New Zealand team. That's the only problem with it. But apart from that, it's all right. But the cocks at the front, oh, they need a big voice. But they're usually a little person, because if they're too heavy, you're carrying dead weight. And then the bow of the boat goes up and it's not so good. So you want a little person, but you need somebody with a loud voice. And they are the ones that are saying, stroke, 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 oh, that. And you know, I live near Worcester. And we see these people practicing, not the New Zealand team, but people practicing in eights, as they're called, on the river. And in the middle of Worcester, there's a very old bridge with very small and narrow arches under the bridge. And one time, I was there with some mates, and we were just watching, and we saw, and there's a bend on the river, and so you could see that they're coming around the bend. And it was so good, because about every fifth stroke, all the people on one side missed they didn't row, because they had to go around the bend. And so it's like stroke, 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 miss, stroke, stroke. And you couldn't hear them, but when they came round, but what was fascinating, I then nudged one of my friends and said, watch this, watch this, watch this. Because if you know when you're rowing, the rowers are rowing backwards. If I'm rowing, I'm facing that way, but going that way. You know that. If you're not a rower, you want to go. And so these guys were rowing, and they were going faster and faster, and you could hear the cocks, stroke, 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 boom. And I'm thinking, they're coming up to the bridge, and it's a low bridge, and it's a narrow bridge. And I'm like, wait, one of those rowers is just going to have a quick look, just to make sure we ain't going to crash. Just watch, just watch. And as they came through, they perfectly went through the bridge, and not a single rower looked over their shoulder, because they trusted the cocks, and they trusted one another, co-labouring together. That is a great model. And so, therefore, let me just ask you, just for a couple of minutes, what do you think makes a good team? What do you think makes a good team? What makes a good collaborative leader? What makes a good team? What makes a good collaborative leader? Just 2 minutes on that with the person next to you. If you don't like the person next to you, feel free to move. Just 2 minutes. Answer those two questions. Okay, just half a minute more. Everybody chip in. Half a minute. Okay, so I want us to help us learn how we might answer that question. Hopefully you've provoked some thinking in there. You may have got some answers, some suggestions. And you will learn this evening that I'm a fan of a guy called Patrick Lencioni. He's written about a dozen books. I'm going to mention him several times tonight. But this is an excellent book, The Advantage it's called. And it's how to build and maintain a healthy team. That's what he's getting at. And I'm going to rattle through something. You'll see a triangle in a moment. But at the end of tonight, we are going to give you the full notes from that. So you will have full notes for this. But I didn't want you to have them beforehand because I want you to get thinking. And what he talks about is a team has three absolute vital constituents. Number one is collective responsibility. We are in this together. We are in this together. If we're in a team, we have a collective responsibility. If you go down, I go down. If you go up, I go up. That's the collective. We share this. Now, whoever's the leader of the team arguably carries a little bit more responsibility because that's where they got a bit more authority because they're leader of the team. But the team has a collective responsibility. We're in this together. And secondly, we have common objectives. We know what we're trying to accomplish. We have that goal in mind. We have that target. We have that mission. We have that clarity of the why that the organization we're part of exists. And so we have common objectives. And the third thing is shared fulfillment. Shared fulfillment. Oh my, yes, when we succeed together. We fail together, we succeed together because we are together in this. So that is the three hallmarks of team that Lencioni talks about. We have a collective responsibility, we have common objectives, and we have shared fulfillment. And that's why he talks about 5 behaviors that accomplish this. 5 behaviors. And that's what the whole of his book is about. So we're going to do the whole book in about 10 minutes, just saying. It might take 12. But some really helpful principles in here. And so these are behaviors. So each of these little slices of a triangle, there's 5 of them, as you can see, and they build on one another. And Lencioni is really clear. These are not feelings. These are not even principles. That's too theoretical. They are behaviors. We choose a behavior. And the first behavior he talks about is building trust. If you are part of a team, building trust is vital. Now, I worked in architecture for some years, but for probably 30 odd years now, I've served in churches, pastoring a number of different churches. And so the context I'll be alluding to is church. But if you serve in a different environment, work in a different environment maybe, then there's principles that you can still apply in a team environment wherever you are. But the first behavior, Lencioni says, is building trust. It's not just predictive trust. Oh, I've known Sally for years. It's not just predictive trust. He calls it vulnerability-based trust. Vulnerability-based trust. In other words, being transparent, being honest. He uses the phrase being naked with each other. And that's an important metaphor. So, for example, if you are part of a team, how easy or difficult do you find it to say, hey, I messed up, sorry. I got that wrong. What about I need help? What about your idea? That's better than mine. I suggested this 10 minutes ago in our discussion, but now we've talked it around. Your idea is better than mine. Some people, their ego gets so much in the way that they just can't say things like that. I wish I could do that. Can you help me learn? And then the $1 million one. Some people just can't say it. I'm sorry. You see, sometimes all those things get in the way, our pride, our ego. Trust is so important. It means abandoning pride and fear and reputation. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but the Lord Jesus was very savvy. In Isaiah, it tells us he made himself of no reputation. Whoa, it's a whole industry now to protect the reputation of a person or the reputation of a ministry or the reputation of an organization or a company. It's like, Jesus made himself of no reputation. Yeah, often we want to build a reputation. And that all becomes about image. And we live in an image-conscious world. Sometimes to be vulnerable, to be honest, to be naked with one another means, hey, this is just me. That's it. I'm really sorry. But that's where trust starts. I've worked over the last 15 years in sort of consulting in lots of churches and church leadership teams. And you know what I've found, sadly? Quite often in leadership teams of churches, a frequent problem is long-standing, shallow relationships. Long-standing, shallow relationships. And so church boards, we can talk about the agendas of church, but there isn't that underneath of openness. And sadly, I sometimes meet lots of Christians and I sometimes meet pastors and leaders, and you find yourself thinking, I wish you could just take the mask off. I feel I'm not talking to the real. Can you let me round the back? I want to see the real. And you believe you, me, anybody Gen Z, anybody 30 and under, that ain't going to work. It ain't going to work if you're presenting an image. You want the real, want the authentic, want the behind the mask. So very important. But it can be quite threatening. I remember being on a team situation some years ago, and there was about 7 of us in the team, and we used to have just the 7 of us would meet for sort of business and planning church activities and stuff, but then we meet with spouses, so there's about a dozen or so in the room for developmental stuff, to develop one another, develop the team, develop our who we were in Christ. And we intentionally wanted to develop trust. And so one of the things we'd do, we'd share our histories. We'd share, just share your histories. Share your background. What shaped you? Well, I was doing this, and my parents did that. My parents got divorced then, and actually, my dad fell away from faith then. And so your history has shaped you, and we can do that in team. So it's opening up the heart a little bit. And one example, this guy who was helping us facilitate this said, let's go around the room and just share with the others your first experience of bullying. Ooh, okay. And we did. Now, we knew each other. We weren't random people. But this is the sort of thing that goes from shallow to deeper relationships. So we went around the room. And so we said, well, actually, I remember when I was 8 at school. And this guy, and I still remember his name, and he used to hit me around the back of the bike sheds. And somebody else would go around. Well, I was 12, and I was in a girls' school, and this horrible girl used to do. And we'd go around, and I remember this. We'd go around the room. We were 3/4 away around the room. And one guy, and I would probably argue the toughest sort of fella, the blokey bloke. You know, that sort of blokey bloke, you get him. And he just was quiet, and I'm like, oh, man. And he suddenly looked up, and I'd never seen him with tears in his eyes. And he quietly said, I was the bully. Whoa. See, developing trust, openness, honesty. You don't switch it on, but you build it. You disclose a little and make sure it's mutual. Then you disclose a bit more, and it's important to do that. This same time, on a different meeting, this guy was helping us, and he said, let's go around the team. And there's 13, 14 of us. He said, let's go around the team, and you just look to the person on your right and say which fruit of the Spirit you see in this person's life. And let's go around the room doing that. So I would say, I think in Bill's life, I see the fruit of long-suffering. And then we'd do that around the room. And that was really affirming. And then he said, let's go around the room the other way and look on the left-hand side and see which fruit of the Spirit you least see in evidence that maybe they need to grow in. That went a little bit deeper. Building trust. Far too often we have shallow relationships. And if you're a task person, you get into the function of accomplishing the task. Short term, that might work. But long term, it will not build healthy team. And so building trust is absolutely vital. It's the foundation. In fact, Lencioni says it makes teamwork possible. The leader's got to go first. If the leader is not vulnerable and honest and open, the team will lock up and you'll have a shallow team, a functional shallow team. In fact, there's a fascinating bit, 2 Corinthians 6, 11 to 13, and then 7:1, he picks it up again. But Paul has a difficult relationship with the Corinth church, if you know that. That's a load of letters back and forth, some of which got in the Bible. But 2 Corinthians 6, 11, he says, we have opened wide our hearts to you. Please open wide your hearts to us. And so if you're a leader, you have to, in a measured way, in a methodical, intentional way, choose to intentionally disclose, and that's going to build trust. Paul says, we've opened wide our hearts to you. Now, please open your hearts to us. I love 1 Thessalonians 2, verse 8. Paul says, we loved you so much, you became so dear to us, that we shared with you not just the gospel, but our lives as well. If you want to influence people for the kingdom, we don't just share the gospel, we share our lives. I remember speaking many, many years ago. I was in another movement. It begins with assemblies and ends with God. And I was pastoring in one of the churches, and I was asked by my pastor, and I was like 30. I was a lad, I was a young pastor, but I was asked to share a short session with a bunch of pastors. And I built on 1 Thessalonians 2:8. You know, we shared not just the gospel. We didn't just share the gospel and run away. We shared our lives. Believe me, anybody Gen Z, anybody 13 under, they're not just looking for the gospel, they're looking for lives to be shared with them. And I'm talking like this. And one of the senior pastors in the movement came to me. I was shiny, 28-year-old probably. He came to me afterwards. I think it's a bit dangerous what you're advocating. And I'm like, what's in the Bible? He says, you've got to be very careful, because if you let people, speaking to a pastor, I was a young pastor, if you let people too close to you, they'll find out what you're really like and they won't trust you. I remember thinking, what a sad, sad thing to say. I'd just gone full-time in Christian leadership, and it nearly sent me back to architecture. because we've got to be open and honest. We shared lives with you. And so building trust is absolutely vital. It's the first step, it really is. But then, building on that, is mastering conflict. Mastering conflict. You see, once you've built trust, you can have productive conflict. Lencioni calls it productive ideological conflict. It's not having a row. Conflict is not a bad thing. In fact, in church situations especially, fear of conflict can be a very negative thing because it buries people's real feelings. And then everything goes underground and then we're all pretending. I hate pretend church. But sadly, it happens quite often. So there needs to be willingness to disagree, and sometimes passionately, around certain decisions. But when there's trust, you can have and master healthy conflict. It can be a bit uncomfortable. And one of the things Lencioni puts in his book is this, and he does the spectrum, and he says, on the right-hand side, we can have mean-spirited personal attacks. So, imagine Michelle and I are on a team serving together, and suddenly I say, Michelle, what a stupid idea. To be honest, that's a brainly, loopy idea, and to be honest, you always come out with stupid suggestions. That's a mean-spirited personal attack. That didn't happen last week, did it? You see, no. But on the other hand, if Michelle says something I disagree with, I like Michelle. I don't want to upset her. I don't want to offend her by saying I disagree with her. That is artificial harmony. If you work in different environments, you will have heard of groupthink. Well, groupthink is extreme artificial harmony. Groupthink, and it's really weird, this groupthink is the word that's used, or the term that's used, when a team of people make a decision that no one in that decision would have made. And that sounds stupid. Why ever would a team make a decision that none of the people in the team would actually make that decision alone? Do you know why? Because they're too nice. And they don't want to offend the other. Jill and I got married 41 years ago. My wife and I got married. And when we first got married, we had no money. We were just about to get a house, and people gave us furniture and beds and things. We bought a cooker for £5. We bought a washing machine that flooded the kitchen every time. But it worked. But after about a year and a half, we were able to buy a 3-piece suite. Now, I learned that's a settee with 2 chairs, in case you didn't know. We were to buy, and we were in the shop, and we were spending £650. It was masses of money. And Jill and I, a team of 2, remember, were in the shop, and we got to the counter, and we're buying this settee. And we got the form out, and we're about to sign. And I just looked across at Jill and says, because you do like this, don't you? And she says, yeah, it's nice. And she says, because you like it, don't you? And I said, well, I'm not dead sure about the colour. And she says, well, I thought you liked the colour. I'm not really sure I like the shape. Well, I said, well, I'm not really sure, but I thought you liked it. We're a team of 2, and we're about to buy a settee that neither of us like because we didn't want to offend the others. You multiply that to something serious in your company or in a church environment, and churches especially sometimes are too nice. And we veer away from mean-spirited personal attacks, but we go to the other extreme, groupthink, and we make stupid decisions. What he argues is that on the left-hand side, this can be constructive. On the right-hand side, that's destructive. Now, I'm not sure I agree. Who wants to throw in a comment? What do you think I might want to alter from that? I'm not sure I agree. If ever you get the book, you'll see this is what he said. Yeah. Excellent, excellent. Yeah. And therefore, although you might say it's constructive, it's actually not constructive. Absolutely true. Thank you. And so for me, I would probably want to say somewhere in the middle is constructive, but both ends are destructive. Because if you think about it, on the right-hand side, it destroys healthy team. If I'm horrible to Michelle and Michelle's horrible, that team is going to be unhealthy, if not dysfunctional, if not an ex-team, a former team. And so the right-hand side is destructive because it really destroys the health of the team. But as you just said, the left-hand side is equally destructive because you get really bad decisions. Like us nearly buying a settee neither of us liked. The whole team didn't like it, and so I probably would want to tweak what Lencioni says, and actually the middle part is constructive. But the left-hand side is destructive of good decisions. The right-hand side is destructive of healthy team. Ephesians 4, verse 15 says, speaking the truth in love. Speaking the truth in love. We need to get both. In Christian world especially, we get lovey-dovey people that don't speak the truth. Or we get harsh, abrasive people who speak the truth. I remember when I was a youngster, people would say, I just need to speak the truth in love to you, brother. When they said brother, it means they're going to whack you, usually. I just need to speak the truth in love to you, brother. Oh, no, we don't just speak the truth, but we speak the truth in love. That's so important. John 1:14, Jesus was full of grace and truth. We've got to somehow get the balance right here if we're going to master conflict. So we build trust and we master conflict. And Lencioni talks about that being the ideal conflict point. Somewhere in the middle is constructive, maybe just to the safe side. So if you're erring towards avoiding mean-spirited attack. So important. And so therefore, you build trust and you master conflict. And then the third one is achieving commitment. Achieving commitment. You see, conflict is important because a team can never get to commitment unless everybody's had their say. Everybody needs to have their opinion heard. I was on a team where the leader was a little bit bombastic, and I had to say a few times, what really matters is I don't mind being disagreed with. But you are going to lose my heart if I'm not heard. And that's a massive difference. And therefore, if you're part of a team, your voice should be heard. You're speaking into that. But once we've had opportunity to speak, to be heard, then we can achieve commitment. Because people will not commit to a decision if they've not been able to provide input to it and ask questions about it and think it through. They need to understand the rationale behind it. That's why we need to be able to build trust, then have healthy discussion that may involve some conflict, and when we've pushed through that, we can achieve commitment. You might achieve compliance by just saying, we're all going to do this. Oh, okay then. That's compliance. That's command and control leadership. That's not collaborative. That's not team. Compliance is different from commitment. Commitment is, I've had my say, I've said all of this. It doesn't necessarily mean consensus. Sometimes I'm with leaders or pastor church leaders, and sometimes a nice, lovely, fluffy pastor, because there's some out there, will say, we're not going to make a decision unless everybody on this team agrees. That's not helpful. Because then you're going to go incredibly slowly, because there's always going to be somebody disagreeing with everything. You need a team decision. You're looking for consent, not consensus. And sometimes on a team, I've gone around a team and said, okay, Bill, you've had your say, and I know that the way the team are feeling, we should go over here. I can tell you're not really saying that, but can you live with that? That's the phrase I would use. Can you live with that? And it's, yeah, okay. And some of the best team players I've ever known in the churches that I've led have been people who they would vehemently argue a case, but then when the team disagrees with that and goes in a different direction, when they walk out of the door, not only will they not sabotage that decision, they will actively support the very decision that they would not have taken. Why? Because they're committed to team. So important. Churches especially are wrecked when somebody comes out of a team environment saying, oh, the blinking team decided this, but I didn't agree with it. No. There's only two options. If you disagree with a team decision, you vehemently argue your case in the team. Some people call it cabinet responsibility, although sometimes the cabinet and the government's not great at it. But you argue your case. But if the team makes a decision that you personally don't own, you've got two options. Number one, you resign from the team. If it's a big enough issue. I'm really sorry, I think there's 3 people in the Trinity. And the team have just decided there's 4 people in the Trinity. I'm sorry, I need to resign. Now, it's a daft one, obviously. We don't teach that at Regents. But that is, if it's a significant, really big issue, it is viable to resign off the team. The other option is to own the decision. To own the decision. And I've worked with some brilliant church elders and others in different contexts who are brilliant at that. So you resign off the team or you own the decision. What you can't do is remain part of the team, sabotaging the decision around the environment. That just doesn't work. And so achieving commitment. Achieving commitment is important because that takes us to the next one, which is embracing accountability. Embracing accountability. And so you've built trust, you've got healthy relationships. That might take a while. This is not done in a week or a fortnight. But then you're able to master conflict. And then you get some really good decisions, but keep a healthy team. And then you reach a decision. You achieve commitment. You say, we're going to do that. And often, in teams especially, you need to write down, make clear, this is the decision. And often one of the jobs of the leader of a team is say, okay, can I just be clear? Just before we move on, are we saying bang, bang, bang? Is that what we're saying? Write that down quick. Because you're capturing the decisions. You're achieving the commitment. But up to then, it's still theoretical. What embracing accountability does is turn a theoretical decision into a practical, real decision, okay? Let me give you an example. So it's turning the theory into practice. There was a season when I was leading a church, pastoring a church of about 600 people, and one of the issues we had was we weren't great at starting on time on a Sunday morning. Now, I'm sure Katie's got that sorted, and your church, if you're from different, I'm sure that's no problem. Anyway, so we weren't great at starting on time. So we decided, and we had a healthy, trusting team. We had some good conflict discussion, and we achieved the commitment of we are going to start on time, and we're going to get one of these little timers. You know, that sort of 5, and then 4:59, 4:58, that's what we're going to do. Yeah. But then the Sunday morning came, and it's like 4:59, 4:58, 2:57, 2:50, 10, 9, 8, 0. Has anybody got me capo? Hang on. Oh, the sound's not working. Hang on, what's happening? It was rubbish. Because we'd made a theoretical decision, but to turn that into reality, we had to hold one another accountable. Hold one another accountable. And on that team, we used to have a Tuesday morning pastors team, pastors leaders, about 8 or 9 of us in the room, and some full-time, some part-time, whatever. And on a Tuesday morning, we used to have a meeting where we reviewed the services. Oh, my goodness. It's like, what went wrong? But starting on time. Another thing, we made a decision that every week we were conscious we had people in who were not followers of Jesus. I mean, I would say to anybody in a church, assume there's somebody who's not a follower of Jesus every time. We get churches that are too cozy if we don't know. So I would always encourage young pastors, assume that somebody is not a follower of Jesus and make sure everything you do is understandable. And so we made the decision, we achieved the commitment of, we're not going to use religious language, religious jargon. We're not going to say, thank God for Calvary. Well, that first time, who the heck's Calvary? And what did he do? And, or we pray for traveling mercies. I've had so many non-Christians say to me, why do Christians ask for traveling mercies and what are they? It's really funny. We do that religious jargon. We really do. It's dead easy to get into that. And we become like this alien culture speaking Christianese. And we wonder why we're alienated from the world we're trying to reach. And so we made that decision. But on Tuesday morning, we used to hold each other accountable. Hey, Gary, you thank God for Calvary. Oh. Phil, you pray for traveling mercies again? Yeah. It's so easy. So the point there is, until you embrace accountability, it's not delivering it in reality. And that's why you need to embrace accountability. Colossians 3 verse 16 says, admonishing one another. Ooh, that takes good relationships. Greet one another with a holy kiss. Although I remember I preached that once many years ago, and a bricklayer in our church came out with his hand out, and big hand, big bricklayer's hand, and he says, that's my holy kiss. That's as close as you get. But there's loads of one another's. I think there's something like 48 one another's in the New Testament. And so that's out of relationship. It's like big team, if you like. Even admonish one another. And so therefore, we need to make sure we embrace accountability. Let me tell you the difference between an okay team and a mature team. An okay team is when there's 5 or 6 of us on the team, and Barry does not do what we'd committed to do. We said we were going to do this, and Barry's not doing it. So what do I do on an okay team? I go to the team leader, and I say, oh, team leader, Barry's not blah, 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 blah. That's okay. But a mature team, I go to Barry. Hey, mate, we said we were going to do, what's going on there? Oh, yeah, sorry. Now, if Barry flies off the handle, you think, for goodness sake, where's the trust? And so an okay team, people go to the leader and want the leader to sort him out, but that's lacking maturity. In a mature team, the people in the team go to one another because you've made a commitment, and now you're holding one another accountable to that. And then finally, the top of the triangle, focusing on results. Focusing on results. Lencioni says, the ultimate point of building greater trust, of mastering conflict, of embracing commitment, achieving commitment, and embracing accountability is one thing: the achievement of results. The achievement of results. But it's the results that are best for the organization that the team is leading. It's not about my results. Because you could say, well, surely we all know it's about the common objective. Do you know what gets in the way? Your department. I don't care if the other departments in my company or the other ministries in the church suffer. This is my ministry. And I know of churches where that ministry to women is more important than anything else and blow the rest, or that evangelism, or that alpha course. No. All these are part of something bigger, of the mission of the whole. And if you're in charge of a department in a company or in a church, that's brilliant. Be passionate about the department, but the department is part of something bigger. And so the results of the whole are what matters. Otherwise, it's our individual career development. Oh, dear. Personal ego, our personal status, our prestige, and here we are again, our reputation. It all becomes about that. There's a little phrase that Lencioni uses. Imagine two fishermen in a boat. One fisherman looks at the guy at the other end of the boat and he says, hey, your end of the boat is sinking. It takes a while. If his end of the boat is sinking, guess what? Your end of the boat ain't going to stand afloat on its own. But we have that mindset sometimes. And so be passionate about the role that God's given you, the ministry, but it's part of something bigger. And please don't make it about your reputation, your ego, your personal fulfillment. The results are the results of the mission of God as seen appropriately in your context. It's so important. It's so important. There's a few words from Lencioni on this, and these will be on the notes you get. There's no getting around the fact that the only measure of a really great organization is whether it accomplishes what it sets out to accomplish. Some leaders of teams that don't regularly succeed will insist that they have a happy team because their team members love each other and no one ever leaves. An accurate decision of that would be to say they have a mediocre team that loves being together and never accomplishes anything. No matter how good a leadership team feels about itself, and no matter how noble its mission might be, if the organization it leads rarely achieves the goals, then by definition, it's not a good team. Because we're back to the very beginning where we're saying it's about collective responsibility. There's a lovely phrase that Paul uses right in the middle of talking about spiritual gifts, for the common good. For the common good. All that passage, 1 Corinthians 12, all about for the common good. And I've grown up in a Pentecostal church and where people sometimes in spiritual gifts, oh, she's got the gift of prophecy. Isn't she wonderful? It's not about her. It's not about him. It's for the common good. That is collaborative leadership as a whole. So important. Focus. So it's collective responsibility, common objectives, and then the shared fulfillment. And for me, if you're involved in church ministry, I want you to know that you're not involved in some small little tiddly thing like making millions and millions of dollars. What we're involved in is much bigger than that. Much bigger than that. It's about seeing people transformed into the Christian that they can be. Becoming followers of Christ and seeing his kingdom come. That's how noble our mission is. And maybe your calling is in some so-called secular job, some other situation, but God has still called you into that environment. So important to do that. My sister has been a social worker for donkey's years, and she's now something called a LADO, a local authority designated officer. She's involved in some heavy-duty thing. Do you know what? She's doing that for Jesus. And so don't ever think, oh, I would be serving Jesus if only I worked in church. No. There's not many people work in church, but we all work in ministry. We all work in kingdom. And the results are what matter. And so here's the word of God to some of you. Get over yourself. Because it all becomes about me. It all becomes about us, especially in leadership. No. We've got to build trust, honest, open relationships. And then we're able to master conflict. In a healthy way, disagree, but do that agreeably, without having a big row, but be honest. And make sure then we achieve commitment. We've all had our say, and this is the team decision. And then we have to embrace accountability to make it work in practice. And you know what? Then we see the results coming because God's kingdom comes. So let's just take a moment to think that through a little bit. There they all are together, and you can see that on there. But here's a question, just for 5 minutes or so. Discuss your experience of team. Discuss your experience of team. So what have you had to learn? What have you had to learn? Oh, my. For me, a long time ago, I realized that I want people to like me. And I disclose too much of myself too often. Just like I just did. It's terrible. I've learned about me. And because I want people to like me, sometimes when I was younger, I wasn't honest. And then eventually you're honest. And because you've not been honest for such a long time, I'm not honest. And then suddenly, I'm honest. No, that's not. And you fly off the handle because you've bottled it up for so long. So funny. So what have you learned in team? What have you had to learn by working with others? What have been the challenges? And what have been the joys and benefits? So what have you had to learn from working in team, whatever that means to you? And what have been the challenges? What have been the joys and benefits? So if you fell out, do it in a 3 or a 4. Don't do it in a Pentecostal 9, but do it in a 3 or a 4. Do it in a 2 if you want. Don't do it in a 1. That's called isolationism. So do it in a 2 or 3. You can do it in a 4, maybe a 5 at maximum. But so you've got 5 minutes to think through those. And try and think personally, not theoretically. We're taking the theory that Lencioni has shown. What have you had to learn? What have been the joys? What have been the benefits? What have been the challenges for you in a practice? That's true.
What I have learned, I still have a lot to learn.
That's true.
Oh my goodness. Nunca vai chegar a hora que
Okay. Let us maybe take a sentence or two if anybody wants to throw out a suggestion if you want to. I did ask you to be personal about the team environment, what you have learnt. So that might be hard to share publicly beyond the group. But what about joys and benefits? And what about challenges? Anybody want to throw out a suggestion there?
The challenges is about actually when you're sharing about yourself. You said about sharing yourself, about yourself. Sometimes you need to be very careful.
Yeah.
You have to know people because they can turn it against you. So if you are not careful, you think you are being open to build a team. You have to be very selective and know the team very well before you speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And just two little comments on that. Number one, I think it's a journey. So if I have something massive, I'm not going to suddenly go to somebody random and suddenly disclose. What I'll do is a little tiny something. So that's the first thing, really gentle. But the other one is mutual. It needs to be two-way. So if I find I'm disclosing and disclosing and disclosing, I'm getting nothing back. No. You know. And to be honest, I mean, it's one of those things, certainly in a church environment, I've known situations where, well, put it this way, if I'm a leader of a church and I'm appointing people to be on team or elders with me, I will be really clear. I mean, I do this with my tutor group at college, but I would do this on leadership in the team. You need to know that if you breach the confidentiality of this group, you have one chance, and we will have a conversation about it. If that happens again, you're off the team. Now, bear in mind, I've been in leadership ministry for 38 years, but I have stood people off leadership team 3 times for breaching the confidentiality. It is so serious. And also, often people ask about if your spouse, you know, if you're on leadership team and your spouse is not. I personally do not believe I have the right to share, to say to half of a marriage who's on team with me, you can't share it with the other half of the marriage. I don't believe I can say that. But I do say, if you choose to share it with your spouse, if your spouse breaches the confidentiality, then it's as if you have. And in fact, of the 3 times, one I stood somebody down because their spouse had leaked. So you're right. You be careful. We need to do it, but we need to do it slowly, and we need to do it mutually, back and forth. Thank you. Really important caveat there. There's somebody else. Yes?
Yeah, I think one other thing is reprimanding. That could be a challenge because at times your subordinate is expecting you to take a side.
Sorry, you said that again? You keep moving it away as you say some of the words.
Give me the email.
You don't like microphones.
Sure. Or because your subordinates, if you correct, some people cannot take correction. They feel being confronted.
Yeah.
And as a leader,
Yeah.
that's part of it that it normally takes, and
Yeah.
you are in a limbo because the person expects you to favor and take the facts that he says. But as a leader, you should listen to both sides.
Yes, absolutely.
And then you give a final decision according to the policies and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so important because to be a disciple of Jesus is to be a learner. Mathetes, the Greek, is to be a learner. And if you're a learner, you need to hear correction. It needs to come appropriately with a good attitude, a good spirit, and stuff like that. So, yeah, absolutely. Is there one more, maybe?
We've got one from here, and they said having somebody on the team who's not a team player and dealing with them. And they said that's one of the challenges that's come up here in the Zoom room.
Yeah. Well, you have a conversation and you say, do you want to turn into a team player? Because if not, the team's not for you. So, I want to just throw this book at you, not literally. It's only a little book, it's not that big, it's only a little book. This is a brilliant book. I'm not going to refer to it, I'm not going to unpack it, but if you want a really helpful book about combining humility and leadership. This is an excellent book, excellent book. It's a Christian author, but it's very subtle. So if you have somebody who's not a Christian and you want to drop it into them, so for example, he'll suddenly talk about the carpenter from Nazareth and let people join the dots of who that is. So really interesting. So Humilitas by John Dixon. He's Australian, but he's a good one. And so the character of leadership, Humilitas, really helpful book. But I was just thinking of some of the Bible verses that talk about collaborative leadership. And we're not going to unpack these. As I said, this is not a biblical module particularly. But there's masses that support collaborative leadership and team. I mean, our God is team. I love that. Trinity, God is team. And that works that way. And God the Father is head of Team God. But they're all equal. And the whole theology of Trinity is magnificent. God is team. Some of these verses talk about the power of working together, partnering with one another. And it literally in the NIV talks of collaborating, collaborating together. The importance of being united. Involving others in fulfilling God's mission. It's that collaboration. Loads of these. I love Nehemiah 3. Whoa, I've preached Nehemiah 3. Everybody looks after their own little bit, but together the whole thing is rebuilt. There's loads in Scripture along those. And the Joshua, I love the Joshua story of Jericho. They were all quiet. They all shouted. They all marched in the same direction. I love that. They all marched in the same direction. I just thank God there was no British home group there. I do, because Joshua would have said, because if you read the Scripture carefully, there are certain things that Joshua has to obey. God is very specific. Do this, 7 times. There's lots of things that Joshua has to obey, but he also has to make a decision. Which way around are we going to go? Nothing in the Bible says whether they went clockwise or anti-clockwise. They had to decide. And Joshua says, we're just going to decide, guys, and we're all going to go this way. But then Harry and Bertha in the British home group, well, we've just been seeking the Lord, and we have the gift of discernment. That's what Christians say. We have the gift of discernment, Pastor Joshua, and we believe our home group needs to go this way. And Joshua said, you bozos, we're all going this way. And so Joshua has to obey what God says and make some leadership decisions. But they have to work together. It wasn't lots of little shouts. It was one big shout. And they all had to be quiet. Can you tell I love preaching that? They all had to be quiet together. I bet there was some flipping raving Pentecostal charismaniacs there. And Joshua says, we're going to be quiet. Oh, hallelujah, we want to sing to Jesus. No, be quiet. Because we're going to shout tomorrow. Oh, my goodness. Anyway, so, and also single leaders, but they're set in team. That's so important, so important. There's a leader, but the leader is always set in team. And so the leader of the Jerusalem church, Acts 15, leader of Jerusalem church. James is the leader of the Jerusalem church. It's very clear, Acts 15 and other places. But there's also a team with him. Who's the pastor of Ephesus church? Pastor Timothy. Timothy's the leader, but there's a team of elders with him. Who's the pastor in rough and tumble Crete? Timothy couldn't have handled Crete. Titus, he's a bit more of a bloke. So Titus is the pastor in Crete. He's the leader of the Crete church. But he's set in teams of elders. Anyway, so I love that. Nehemiah, we know Nehemiah. But who was on the restoration crew team with Nehemiah? There was Nehemiah. There was Ezra. There was Haggai. There was Zechariah. There was Zerubbabel. Oh, I love Zerubbabel. If we'd had another child, we would have called him Zerubbabel. But my wife wouldn't let me. But they're all together. They're all teamed together. And we know of Nehemiah, but Ezra was critical, and Haggai, and Malachi, and Zerubbabel. They're teamed together. We know Moses, but there's team. There's Aaron and Hur, and Joshua was the kid ready for taking it on the leadership after. Loads and loads of stuff in Bible. Anyway, it's not a Bible module, but I couldn't resist it. So, I love this book. This is another Australian, funny enough. That's unusual. And this is really brilliant book, Brian Harris. And it's called The Tortoise Usually Wins. The Tortoise Usually Wins. I love this. The Tortoise Usually Wins. It's biblical reflections for quiet leaders and reluctant leaders. I love reluctant leaders. Sometimes in our college and other colleges are the same, you get somebody who's like, shiny 19 or 20 year old. I want to be a leader. And it's like, what they mean is, I want to be at the front. I want everybody to look at me. Give me a microphone. Give me a big platform. And I'm like, oh, for goodness sake, get over yourself. What I love is when I see a bright, shiny 20-year-old and they say, hey, you and you're my mates. This thing over there is not good. It needs to be better. Can you help me make that better? That's leadership. Because it's not me being at the front and being noisy and brash and loud and dogmatic. And that's not leadership. Leadership is saying, hey, that thing over there, it's not good and it needs to be better. Can you help me make that better? That is leadership. And so I love this. Reluctant leaders and quiet leadership, not bossy, dogmatic, commanding, controlling leadership. And he talks of 5 virtues. 5 virtues. I'm going to ask you to think about these in a moment. The first virtue of good leadership, he says, is modesty. Now, isn't that funny? You would have thought it would be decisiveness, strength, charisma. No. For quiet, strong, biblically based leadership, modesty. Have a realistic appraisal of the part they play. These leaders acknowledge everything does not depend on them. If a church is ever built where everything depends on the pastor, that is dreadful. And if ever a church thinks the pastor owns it, no, it's Jesus's. And so it's so important that we recognize the realistic part we play. It's not all about us. There's a little phrase, it's not on the notes actually, it's a phrase I love that Brian Harris says. We are not the giant of all our dreams, but neither are we the dwarf of our nightmares. Oh, I love that. We are not the giant of all of our dreams, but neither are we the dwarf of our nightmares. Romans 8 says, consider yourself with sober judgment. Don't look up, don't look down. It's so important. So modesty, he says, is an important virtue. Restraint. Restraint. That's an interesting one. These leaders control and channel what they feel. They don't vent. Learn patience and self-discipline and learn to consult. Sometimes we've had unilateral leaders who will just be dogmatic. No. Collaborative leadership is about consulting. And again, if you look through loads of those Bible verses, they consulted. One of those verses was when Jethro comes to visit Moses and says, hey, you're doing everything yourself. That's not good. You need to share the load. It's no good for you and not good for them. And so there's that classic phrase would be delegation empowerment, but that sharing of the load. And so restraint is learning to consult. It's not just me being on my own. It's channeling. There was a guy I knew quite well, actually, and he wrecked a church. He was the pastor, but he wrecked a church. And he wrecked a church because he couldn't stop himself venting. And I said to him once, I said, and he damaged the relationships through emails. I hope you know that lots of, maybe companies are as well, but I know churches are damaged by people doing emails. Because they email when they should talk. And this friend of mine, and I said, if ever you're hitting the keys very hard, and I think that if you're hitting the keys hard, don't send the email. Sleep on it, keep it in drafts. But sadly, he couldn't stop himself venting. It was, I feel, if ever you're writing an email, I feel that. No, not in an email. And so restraint is holding that back. Restraint is holding that back. So modesty, restraint. And then thirdly, I put that up. Sorry. Tenacity. You've got to be tenacious. Realize that making a difference usually takes time. I'm often saying to young pastors, and it's a well-known phrase really, I often say to young pastors, you will overestimate what you're going to do in a year and underestimate what you're going to do in 10 years. That being tenacious. Without perseverance, few people get beyond daydreaming. Dead easy to daydream. But to put it into reality, just keep going. I remember when we were pastoring a church up in South Manchester, and we'd had some challenges with things, and somebody came we supported some missions workers in Austria, and these guys came, and Gianni brought this prophetic word, and the prophetic word was, it's almost like a boulder, where you're just hitting a boulder, and you feel like you're not achieving anything. But then, suddenly, the boulder cracks in half. And in actual fact, every time you've hit it, something's happened at the core of that boulder, but you've not seen it. Then you hit it again, and you can't see it, but you just keep going. And breaking through tenacity is so important. This last two, I would say, are absolutely crucial. Interdependence. If you have independent people, especially independent leaders, you are not going to get collaborative leadership. Interdependence, where you view others cooperatively rather than as competitors. If you're head of the children's ministry team and you view the head of the old people's ministry in the church as a competitor, that's not good. That's not good. Fighting for budget, fighting for personnel. No. Interdependence. Others are collaborators with you, cooperatively, not competitors. And they're liberated. Somebody who has this virtue of the quiet leadership, they're liberated by their reliance on the input of others. They don't see the input of others as a threat, as though they're putting you down. They're supporting you. But some people, due to pride and ego, always want to be the decision maker and the ideas creator. Funny enough, Dave Newton, he's our leader, but he's moved on now. He's just gone. You probably have heard. He's been which is why I'm the acting principal, very temporarily. But he's moved on to be National Director of Scripture Union, England and Wales, which is brill. But one of the things I saw in Dave that was so wonderful is that he was brilliant at making sure we had the best decision possible. But he didn't need to make it. He saw his responsibility as making sure, do you know, in this discussion, we are going to get the best decision we can. But if it comes from Martin or from Simo or from Jenny or from... That's brilliant. But sometimes insecure leaders are not good at interdependence because it's all going to be about them. And the final one, which probably undergirds them all, I would say, other-centeredness. Other-centeredness. These quiet leaders realize that Christian leadership is follower-focused. They consciously step into the worlds of those that they serve. It's not about us as leaders. It's about who we're serving. We'll revisit that before we close tonight. But just a couple of phrases before I ask you to discuss something. This is from The Tortoise Usually Wins. The best quiet leaders are able to mix tenacity with restraint. A car without brakes is hazardous, but a car with brakes but no accelerator will not go anywhere. Tenacity provides the drive to keep going. When coupled with restraint, it equips the quiet leader to discern those moments when it is better to back away. Accelerator brakes, accelerator brakes. And sometimes when I'm mentoring, coaching young leaders, I say to them, which battle do you need to win? Because there's some things not worth fighting over. And people in church want to, yes, okay, do that. But this one, no. We're going to argue, we're going to fight for this one. And then it says a little bit more a few pages later. Quiet leaders evaluate decisions on the basis of their impact on the lives of those they serve, not on their own life. Oh, that's so big. Quiet leaders should consciously make the decision to step out of the world of their personal preferences and fears to enter into the worlds of those they serve. This is all Brian Harris's way of saying, leader is not about the leader. Leader is about the best and the good of the organization, the company, the church. That's why that other-centeredness is so vital. So I'm going to do two things now. So I want you to spend 5 minutes on discussing this. Then I'm going to break in very quickly and give you another 10 minutes to do the forms that I mentioned a few minutes, Michelle mentioned at the beginning. And so 5 minutes to answer this. How are you doing with these? Modesty, restraint, tenacity, interdependence, other-centeredness. Those are the 5 virtues. How are you doing with those? Where are you strong? What do you need to strengthen? I look at that, and my wife and my kids would say tenacity. I am a completer finisher. Oh, I am a completer finisher. I tell you why I'm a completer finisher, because my dad wasn't. Yeah. You come into our house, and there was always the last piece of wallpaper never got put up. The last bit of painting was never done. It was so funny. It was like a family trait. And I saw that, and it was so... My dad was one of 12, and they were all the same. And when they were first married, my mum told me that she was, oh, yeah, Colin's not done that. He's going to do that later. And all her sisters-in-law were, oh, yeah, we know that one. And I think I'm a completer finisher. I'm tenacity. But do you know what? I'm not sure other-centeredness. I'm learning, but I make it about me too. Anyway, so modesty, restraint, tenacity, interdependence, other-centeredness. In any leadership role, how are you doing? Where are you strong? And what do you need to strengthen? So think about that, and we'll give you 5 minutes on that. And then in 5 minutes, I'm just going to break in just for 30 seconds or 1 minute to explain the forms, and then you'll carry on, okay? So we've got 5 minutes, then 10 minutes. So if you want to sort of help yourself to a drink and everything during that time, do feel free. So 5 minutes on this, and if you could put the counter on again, that would be great. And then in 5 minutes, I'm just going to break in for 1 minute, and then I'm going to tell you what the next step is that you're going to do for 10 minutes. So we've got about 15 minutes, okay? So go for that. very brief minute, and then you're going to carry on discussing and doing something a little bit on your own, actually, but just very briefly. So I'm going to be taking and finishing with something from this book, but if you could, I would... There you go. So you have the sheet that... Now, this is a big version. You have the sheet like that. So on the left-hand side, you have the being a team player, and you have 18 questions. So if you look at the left-hand side first, and you can see, use the scale below to indicate how each statement applies to your actions on a team. Be as honest as you can. There's no point in just saying what you wished you were, saying what you are. But don't miss what it says at the top. My teammates would say. So it's not what you say of yourself, it's what your teammates would say about you. What would your teammates say about you? So, I compliment or praise them without hesitation. Well, if you usually do that, write 3. If you never do that, write 0. Or maybe it's a 2 or a 1. And so fill those in and get those. And once you've got all those numbers, you should have 18 numbers. And obviously, you can't go below 0. And you can't go above 3. Okay? No way. And so put those numbers in there. And then once you've got those numbers, transfer them to the chart on the right-hand side. And you can see you put the number in the white box. So no numbers go in the grey boxes. Ignore the grey boxes. And so for question 1, it goes into column A. For question 2 is in column B. And question 3 in C. You can see how that works, okay? Then if you get time, you will have put all those numbers in. Then add up the numbers in column A, the numbers in column B, numbers in column C, okay? So everybody got that? Any questions on that? That makes sense. So don't forget, it's what your teammates would say about you in a team situation. Be as honest as you can. Put your numbers in the boxes on the right, then transfer them to the appropriate column on the left-hand side, and then hopefully, if you get time, add up the 6 numbers in A, the 6 in B, the 6 in C. Okay, so we're going to give you, let's say, 9 minutes. Let's do 9 minutes to do that before we finish on something else. So there are some people waiting for me to move on, saying, come on, Pete, I'm bored. And other people rushing, hurrying up because their maths is not so good. Don't worry about interpreting anything or guessing where they're going, because we're going to unpack that now. So I'll just give you a minute. Just give you half a minute just to finish off some of it. Okay, so if you're okay for me to move us on, and we will be unpacking what you've just been doing. I love these sort of things. I was just saying to Michelle, but no, don't let one of these define you. They're just always interesting things to do. Some of you might have done DISC or Myers-Briggs or Neris or all these sort of strength finders is a really good one. So there's loads of stuff. Sorry? Okay. Yeah, and I love this book, The Ideal Team Player. It's Patrick Lencioni again, and if you can find this secondhand or reasonable, it is well worth getting. And so what he does is he talks about 3 essential virtues of an ideal team player. 3 essential virtues. He talks about being humble, And it's so interesting how it connects with some of the stuff that Brian Harris talked about. Somebody who's humble, they share the credit with others. They emphasize team over self. And they define success collectively rather than individually. Somebody who's humble is not always full of themselves. And you know the famous phrase that humility is not thinking badly about yourself, it's just thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. So it's so important. But it is amazing that so many leaders who value teamwork will tolerate people who aren't humble. Sometimes people reluctantly hire self-centered people and they justify it just because the people have the skills. That's not good. It's not good. It's an essential virtue to put team success over personal success, to share the credit. So being humble is absolutely an essential virtue. The second essential virtue is to be hungry. To be hungry. I mean, not food hungry, but somebody who is hungry in a collaborative team situation almost never has to be pushed to work harder. They have a manageable and sustainable commitment to doing a job well, and they go above and beyond what is required. Some types of hunger, of course, are not good. Hunger that's in a selfish way. I'm hungry for self-promotion. I want Pete Reed Ministries to be the international global brand. So hunger directed in a selfish way, or hunger taken to an extreme which consumes somebody's identity, or hungry that means you never switch off. That's why we need the Sabbath. That's why we need the rest. And so it's important that we are hungry. So being humble, he says, is an essential virtue. Being hungry for the success of the organization. And sometimes you can watch a football team and whichever team you support, you sometimes think, they're just not fighting for it. It's almost like they don't care. Well, no. Hungry is passionate, but passionate for the team's success to accomplish its mission. And so humble is making sure it's about the team success, not my personal success. It's not about, I knew a team somewhere where the team had creative ideas, but the team leader always took the credit. And boy, that didn't go down well with the team. And you know what? Eventually the team stopped sharing ideas. And so humble is critical, but so is hungry, passionate for the cause of the team. Now the third one, I'm not a fan of the word, but I'll use the word he uses. The word he uses is smart. Smart. I think that can be a little bit misleading because it doesn't mean intellectually smart, it means emotionally smart. And so some of us might talk about emotional intelligence. We might talk a bit more about this next week, actually. I'm back again next week. And so emotionally smart. So it refers to a person's common sense about people. They listen to what others are saying and they stay engaged with them. They don't say and do things without knowing the likely responses of their colleagues. And so they can read the room, as it were. They can read the signals. They can tell when somebody else is upset or angry or whatever. And so this probably needs a bit of clarification. It's not intellectually smart. It's emotionally intelligent, emotionally smart. So if you like, the ability to be interpersonally appropriate and aware. Being smart doesn't necessarily imply having good intentions. One of the phrases that Lencioni uses, some of the most dangerous people in history have been noted for their interpersonal smart skills. And so therefore, he talks about being humble, being hungry, and being smart. And then what he does is he says the ideal team player. And if you want to unpack this and get hold of the book, that's fine, but is humble, hungry, and smart. So you can see the middle, whatever that colour is, the middle one where all three are in there. That is what Lencioni advocates. And so here, if you want to know what numbers you got, whatever you got for A is what Lencioni would put in the humble column. So how blue are you? I think the maximum you could have got was 18. And so if you look at the bottom of your score chart, you'll see at the bottom it talks about scoring. 18 or 17, the virtue is a potential strength. 16 to 14, you got some work to do. 13 or lower, oh dear. And so 8 or lower, then that's the time to find somebody to mentor you and coach you. And so A is humble, B is hungry, and C is smart. And so if you want to scribble that at the side of them, whatever you got in A, that's for humble. Whatever you got in B is hungry. And whatever you got in for C is smart, that emotional intelligence. And so talk to a friend afterwards and see if they agree with you or not. If they say, well, actually, yeah, now you mention it, you do lack humility, Marcello. Oh, sorry. sorry, the name just... Now you mention it, you do lack hungry. And so, again, in a healthy team, you can do stuff like this and discuss it and think it through. And yeah, because all of us have got something to learn. If you are a disciple of Jesus, you are a mathetes, you are a learner. If you are not learning, you are definitely not leading. And you're not a disciple because disciples are learners. And so if you got -5 for humble, but that's just a bit of fun, but it's just interesting. And that score chart is right out of the book. We just lifted those questions out of Lencioni's book. But just to finish with something to think it through. So you can see here, humble is the blue, hungry is the red, and emotionally smart is the yellow. And what he's saying is, you want somebody who's an ideal, really great team player to have all of those. All of those. You want somebody who is humble, so it's about the team. But you want somebody who's hungry. Come on, passionate. Come on, we've got to see this vision through. But you also need somebody who's quite emotionally savvy and can tell when somebody's upset or offended, when to... In fact, Michelle and I were just talking about when to use the accelerator, when to use the brakes. That comes out of knowing people. And so you need all three. But just look at this for a moment. What happens when 2 of them are lacking? And so, for example, if you look in the top left, that person is humble only. If you have somebody who is just the blue, then Lencioni calls them the pawn. Not the prawn, this is the chess piece, the pawn. Because they don't have hunger and passion, and they're not emotionally smart. They just have humble. And therefore, he describes them as the pawn. They're pleasant, they're kind-hearted, they're unassuming, but they don't feel a great need to get anything done. They're just around. They don't have the ability to build effective relationships. Pawns don't make waves, so they can survive for quite a long time on a team doing absolutely nothing. Especially on teams that value harmony and don't demand performance. So if you've got a team that is not bothered about failing and just wants to have a happy time, pawns can hide there because they don't read the intelligence emotionally and they've got no hunger. So he calls them the pawn. They're humble, but they're only humble. But what about the top right? Oh, the bulldozer. Anybody been around church for a while and met some bulldozers? Anyway, no. See, they're hungry, but they don't have humility, so it's all about them. And they don't have emotional intelligence skills, And so they don't read the fact that somebody's upset. And so, we're going to do this, and I don't care what you're doing. And she starts crying, and he doesn't even notice. No yellow, no emotional intelligence there, and no humility. We're just doing this because I said. Why are we doing that, Pastor? Because I said so. Why are we doing that, boss? Because I. No. And so this is hungry, passionate, but there's no humility and there's no emotional intelligence. The bulldozer. They're determined to get things done, but they're focused only on their own interests, their own personal gain. There's no understanding of how their actions will impact others. Bulldozers are quick destroyers of teams. Fortunately, they stand out, so they can be identified and removed. However, in organizations that focus on production alone, they can thrive and go uncorrected for long periods of time because the task and the mission is such a priority. I've had friends who've involved, I was tempted to name them, but I won't name them, but some missions organizations especially will be so mission and task oriented that people get hurt and damaged. And I've been around Christianity long enough to know that sometimes a mission-focused organization can be so task-driven that it lacks the people care. So important. And so, what about the bottom one? He calls it the charmer. The charmer. They're not humble, and they're not hungry, but they've got good emotional intelligence. They can be entertaining and likable, but they've got little interest in the success of the team, either in accomplishing the goal or the development of their colleagues. They often wear out their welcome because they're not humble, they're not hungry for the cause and the mission, but they've got great people skills. They're good fun, they're goofy, and we live with them for a while until we get fed up with them because they're not humble and they add nothing to the mission of the team. And so, please avoid the pawn who's only humble. Avoid the bulldozer who's only hungry, and avoid the charmer who's only emotionally smart. And then you can see, what about where one virtue is lacking? Now we're saying that somebody for example, at the top is humble and hungry. That's great, but they're not emotionally smart. Lencioni calls them the accidental messmaker. They don't realize they genuinely want to serve the team. They're humble, they want to serve the team, but their lack of understanding of how their words and actions are received by others causes damage. Inadvertently, they leave emotional and relational messes all over the place. I think the guy I was talking about before, my friend, he was a good guy, but he lacked the yellow. He just didn't realize that he'd sent an email and it would damage things. And it's so important. And so the accidental messmaker, they're humble, they're hungry, but they're just not good at the emotional intelligence, that reading of relationships. And then, of course, on the bottom left, the lovable slacker. The lovable slacker. They're humble, that's fine, and they're smart, they're emotionally savvy. They're just not hungry. They're not hungry for the mission of the church or the company or the organization. They're not full of themselves, they're not arrogant. They are adept at working with other people, but unfortunately, they only do what they're asked. One of the things that happens in our college is students go on placements in churches and sometimes other organizations, food banks, charities, hospitals, sometimes prisons and juvenile detention centers, stuff like that. And our students go there. And every now and then you get a report back. They said, it was pleasurable having such and such a person doing their college placement here. However, they only did things when they were directly asked. They never took any initiative. And it's sort of that, the lovable slacker. They've got limited passion. They're just not hungry for the mission. They often have other priorities that are more important. They're charming, and they're quite hard to confront. After all, they're lovable. They are lovable. They're just a slacker. They don't add to the mission of the organization. And then finally, the bottom right. Ooh, these are dangerous. The skillful politician. The skillful politician. They are hungry. They're clever. They're ambitious. They're willing to work really hard indeed, as long as it will benefit them personally, because they're hungry. But often they're adept at portraying themselves as humble. So they can look humble, but actually they're not. They can leave a trail of destruction. And sometimes other people can be manipulated, discouraged, and scarred. Oh my goodness, it's really tricky because they are skillful. They can play people. That's the emotional intelligence. See, the emotional intelligence is dangerous if it's not got humble. Because I know how to manipulate. I know how to vision cast. I know how to maneuver somebody. Oh my goodness. And if we're not careful, Christian leaders in different contexts can have that hungry for the mission and that how to play people, how to maneuver people, but they're just lacking humble. And that is the skillful politician. And so may God protect us and may we be aware of not having a pawn. Oh my goodness. And not having the bulldozer and not having the charmer. But may we be especially, because these are a little bit more subtle when we get to these, especially the skillful politician, because there's only one missing. So I pray that you would be able to be a better team player and a better team leader. One final thing to leave with you, and another Patrick Lencioni book. This is probably the one I would suggest. This is his latest, and I love this. The Motive. I'm only going to do a very quick dive into this because I love The Motive. What he does is he explores two leadership motives. And he talks about the difference between somebody who has reward-centered leadership and somebody who has responsibility-centered leadership. So what he means by that is if somebody has reward-centered leadership, the risk is, and I'll use, obviously I said being a pastor of a church is my main context for many decades. You have somebody who says, all Christians are involved in ministry. So it's almost like there's a circle over here, which is ministry. This is ministry. But I've been serving in ministry, and now I've become a leader. And I've come out of that ministry serving circle, and I'm now in leadership. And now I've graduated to leadership. I'm not down there with those plebby people doing ministry. I've graduated to leadership, which of course is a much smaller circle, that's right. Because there's fewer of us in, because it's quite select and quite elite. And I'm called to leadership. And what people do with that mindset is, I used to be serving in ministry, but now I'm a leader. And I'm now reward. I have the reward and the privilege. And I have all these things that we do to reward leadership. That's reward-centered leadership. What I would want to argue is we have this circle over here called serving, called ministry. And within that circle, some people are called to be leaders. And they have leadership ministry. But you know what? It's still in this circle. You've not come out of serving to lead. You're still in serving, but you're serving by leading. And therefore, it's in here with all the other. And so you can have people who are serving in this ministry, called to this, called to this. All these other ministries, they're all loads and loads of little circles in this big circle called serving. And one of them is leadership. In fact, if you turn that circle and spin it around so it's horizontal, leadership is not above. Leadership's below. Because leadership is training, equipping, resourcing and training, developing and supporting all the other ministries. Leadership ministry is underneath the other ministries, supporting and training all the other ministries. And when we invert that and put leadership as an elitist at the top, that's what Lencioni calls reward-centered leadership. I used to be a servant, but now I'm a leader with all the privileges and advantages of that. Responsibility-centered leadership, he says, is when it's all about the task that God has called me to. Not about me. It's not about me being rewarded. Now I'm a leader. If I have a leadership role, it's to lead the organization, to lead the team, to lead the church, to lead the company, and to do the very best I can. Not for my personal gain as a reward, but for the best for the ministry, the church, the organization, or the company. That's responsibility-centered leadership. And let me finish with a couple of thoughts from Lencioni. Most leaders today don't generally see their role as a privilege or a duty. They see it as a right and a reward. Oh, that's so sad. And then he says, it annoys me when people praise someone for being a servant leader, as though there is any other valid option. I love that. This is our God, the servant king. He's our model. Jesus redefined kingship. He's a king, but he redefined kingship as servanthood. If you know Isaiah prophesies that the great conquering king will come. But he's also the servant. That's why we've got 4 servant songs. And that's why in Revelation, The Lion of the tribe of Judah, glory, splendor, triumph, majesty. And then I saw a lamb looking as if it had been slain, the epitome of servanthood. Jesus redefines kingship to mean servanthood. The glory is founded on the servant. So important. And then Lencioni also says this. I fear that too many people have come to tolerate, even expect leaders to be self-centered. I believe it's long past time that we as individuals and as a society re-establish the standard that leadership can never be about the leader more than the led. That ties in with what we said before from Brian Harris about other-centeredness. And so therefore, if God has called us to be a leader, may we be the best leader we can. May we be humble, but may we also be hungry for the mission of the church or the company or the call of God on our lives. But may we also grow and learn, and some of us need to learn that, about emotional intelligence, about people skills, about reading the room and understanding our impact on other people. We need the blue, we need the red, we need the yellow. And if we lack one of those, oh, that's dangerous. If we lack two, that's dangerouser, because the ideal team player is in the middle. And also, if you're a follower, then revel in the joy of following. It's so important that we don't ever think leadership's up here and other ministries are down there. No, if anything, all the ministries God has given, not just in church, but in kingdom beyond church. All those ministries, leadership's underneath. Equipping, resourcing, training, developing. So important. And so let's finish with this question. What have you learned this evening? How can you become a better and more collaborative leader? So let's just take a couple of minutes on that with the person next to you. What have you learned this evening, and how do you think you might be able to become a better and more collaborative leader? And if you want to, discuss your 3 scores, your A, B, and C scores. What did you do best in? What did you do worst in? Just for a couple of minutes before we close. I am actually, yes. I'm with Anna Chan. Do you know Anna? Yeah.
Shall I wrap it up? Let me know when. Well, don't forget that you can continue these conversations in the classroom. Who's visited the online classroom so far? Yeah, there's about 20 of you in there. Well, there's loads of that you can download another version of this exercise we've done tonight. So if you want to redo it, if you didn't quite get it tonight and want to go through it again, just go into the classroom, download another set, and you can have a go at it. And maybe, Marcelo, because it's not in Portuguese, you might need to go through it a bit with your guys. But wasn't that fantastic? So let's say thank you to Pete. He's going to be there for a few minutes, but he does need to get a train to Bristol. So we won't keep him too long. But Pete's back with us next week. So if you've got questions from this week, come early and have a chat to him because he'll be here next week. And Anna Chan will be here. Remember we met her on the first night? She'll be here with Pete next week as well. So we've got a guest speaker. So, and I don't know about you, but did you find Pete speaks about 1.5 times as fast as everybody else we know? That must be because he's a... Well, the good thing is, the recording of this class will be in the online classroom. So you can go onto the online classroom and watch it slowly, stop, take notes, and go back. The other 2 earlier sessions are already there. So at the back, we've got 2 things for you. One of the notes we didn't give you at the start because we knew you'd get distracted by them. So pick up one of them. And the other thing, we're going to do some shameless marketing. Okay, with a little card. Pick one up, take it with you. If you, at the end of this, you think, I want to... Now, if you're on this one, Michelle's going to keep on telling you when new modules are started until you've done all 6. So you're going to keep getting those emails. And if you've only done 3 out of the 5, we're going to invite you back next year to complete and do more study. So don't ever worry about that. But this is one. It tells you what we do at IBIOL on the front. But on the back, it says, I'm interested in part-time courses. Well, that's what you're doing at the moment. I'm interested in full-time Bible school. Oh, that's an interesting one. Or new, I'm interested in postgraduate study. So if you're interested in doing a master's. So take one of these, keep it for you, give it to a friend. All we'll do is we'll contact you and tell you about the courses that are available. You won't go on another database. You won't be bombarded with emails from Regents or from Kensington Temple. It's just about, do you want to think about more study? And if you say, thank you very much for the information, I'm going to put it on hold for a year, we'll go, okay, that's fine. Let us know when you're interested again. But take one, and if you're interested in more study, just fill it in. You can give it back to us. There's a QR code. All that does is ask for your name and email address, and that's all it does. You're not signing up, it's not signing your life away. We're just shamelessly marketing and saying more people need to hear what Pete taught tonight, don't they? So get this into the hand of somebody so they can learn. Okay? Amen. Let's just pray together. Father, we thank you. Father, I thank you that every person in this room is a leader. Every person has been called to be an influencer. And Father, I pray that you will raise them up in influence in their home, in their community, in their family, in their workplace, and in their church. We thank you for this teaching. We thank you for the wisdom that's brought it for us. And we pray for Pete tonight as he goes home. Give him traveling mercies as he heads back to Bristol. And and Father, bring him safely back to us next week for more. Amen. And thank you, Ashok, in the online classroom. Good night. See you next week. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Grace. Brian, well done. Thank you, guys.